Hello, Year 9. This is the first lesson in the Holocaust unit. So to get our first lesson started, I want you to have a look at the picture. Now, if you've ever been to York, some of you may have actually visited Clifford's Tower, but I just want you to think, why perhaps is this building significant in history? And how might it connect us to the persecution of Jews in England? So what we're going to look at today is why were medieval Jews persecuted? So we're going to look at the events of what happened at Clifford's Tower. We're also going to look at why Jewish minorities faced discrimination and prejudice in Europe. And this will really help us to understand the roots of anti-Semitism in Europe in this medieval period. Before we start, there are a few key terms that you need to know. The first is a word I've already used, the idea of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is basically hostility or prejudice directed against Jewish people. And of course, a prejudice is an opinion towards a person or a group of people that is not based on truth or reason. So a prejudice is directed towards Jewish people. In that sense, it is anti-Semitism. Ritualistic is a set action performed as part of a ceremony, and usually with some type of religious importance. Blood libel, well, libel means to make a false and damaging claim about somebody or something. So a blood libel refers to lies spread about Jews committing ritualistic murders. And this is something that spread quite far around Europe in the Middle Ages. And then we have the last one, pogrom, which is violent attacks directed against an ethnic minority, in this case, the Jews in Europe. So ritualistic, blood libel, and pogrom, we will put those into context a little later on in the lesson. Let's have a look at Clifford's Tower, because this is a really important event that took place, which really highlights the fact that anti-Semitism was alive and well in England back in the Middle Ages. So Clifford's Tower is in York, and it was built by William the Conqueror. And in the 12th century, York had a very small community of Jews. Now, William needed money so he could build castles and cathedrals, and Jews were not forbidden from making a profit by lending money. So unlike Christians, Jews could lend money out and in return be able to make a profit. So they were invited to England to become money lenders. However, they faced increasing hostilities because, one, the Crusades, which were happening at this time, increased religious hatred towards any non-Christian, and Christians felt really bitter about being in debt to wealthy money-lending Jews. So in 1190, the city of York caught fire, and the people in York blamed the Jews for this fire. An angry mob looted their houses and brutally killed some of the occupants of these prominent Jews, and the remaining families sought refuge inside Clifford's Tower. And at that time, it was actually a wooden structure. It didn't look as the picture showed in the previous slide. Now, the castle was surrounded by an angry mob for several days, and the castle was under siege, meaning nothing was going in and nothing was coming out of that castle. Now, eventually, the wooden castle was set on fire, and the people inside faced a horrific decision. They could either die from the fire or try and escape and obviously be murdered by the angry mob and crowd waiting for them outside. So the people inside made a very tough decision, and they decided to kill their wives and children before they killed themselves. There were only a handful of survivors, and these people were told that they needed to convert to Christianity or they would be killed. Several of them agreed and left the castle, but they were pretty much murdered anyway. So all in total, 150 people died in this massacre. The mob then destroyed financial records showing who owed money to which Jewish moneylender. And by doing this, it might actually reveal a little bit more about the motive of the massacre. Potentially, it is not just simply religiously motivated. Potentially, people were looking to clear their debts as well. So why is Clifford's Tower really important for us? Well, again, it shows us that this anti-Semitism existed in Europe a long time before the Nazis in the 20th century. Anti-Semitism has been happening for centuries. And as you can see from that photograph, they have daffodils planted at Clifford's Tower to remember the victims of this massacre. So we have a source here. This is an extract from William of Newburgh's account of the massacre, written in 1190. Now, William was the canon of a Christian monastery in York. So he was alive at the time of this massacre, as well as he was a Christian living in York. This is what he has to say. The zeal, meaning the strong feeling, of the Christians against the Jews in England broke out fiercely. It was not because of their faith, but because of their luck and from envy of their good fortune. Bold and greedy men thought that they were doing an act pleasing to God. They wanted the insolence of these sneaky Jews to be checked and their blaspheming tongues curbed. The men of York were not worried about fear of the king, nor the vigor of the laws, nor by feelings of humanity, when venting their fury with the ruin of their fellow citizens and from rooting out the whole race in their city. And as this was a very remarkable occurrence, it ought to be transmitted to those in the future at great length. Basically, this source is saying, what happened to the people at Clifford's Tower was mostly because the Christians in York envied their good fortune and their luck. They weren't necessarily doing this because they were Christian and they were Jews, right? They didn't like that they were making a profit and being successful off of money lending. And again, that was something that was a no-no for Christians. Hence the idea of blaspheming tongues curbed. Okay, so think about this source, and I don't want you to write these down, I just want you to have a quick think based on this source. Obviously, why is the attack happening? So according to William, why is this attack happening? And then what is his opinion, do you think, of the attackers based on his language and stance? And William Newburgh seems to feel it is important for people in the future to know about what happened. So why do you think he felt like this? Why do you think he felt it was important to remember the events at Clifford's Tower? And ultimately, do you agree? So your first task is I need you to read through, again, the story, those textbook pages 104 to 105 on the massacre at Clifford's Tower. And based on that information, you need to answer these 4 questions. First, why had Jews come to medieval England? 2, why was there growing resentment towards Jews in the 12th century? So resentment means a little bit like a hatred or an annoyance towards someone. So why was there this growing hatred and resentment towards Jews in the 12th century? Third, what seems to have been behind the violence at Clifford's Tower? So basically, what actually do you think was the motivation behind this attack? And finally, what do you think the story can tell us about what it was like to be Jewish in medieval Europe? So answer those questions, please, on a sheet of paper, in your books, wherever. And then we come to this idea of a blood libel. Now, this goes all the way back to 1144 in Norwich. A 12-year-old boy called William didn't make his way home. and his body was found tortured and mutilated. And very quickly, a rumor starts to spread that William had been killed ritualistically by Jews who needed the blood of children for the festival of Passover. And this is what becomes known as a blood libel. Again, libel means that lie, it's that untruth. So we're lying, because obviously this is a rumor, it's untrue, but that William was killed because the Jews needed his blood for the festival of Passover. This was something ritualistic and it had a religious motivation behind it. Of course, there was no evidence to support this accusation, but the story spread all throughout Europe and it survived for hundreds of years. And as a result of this rumor spreading and a lot of people believing it to be true, it was used to justify attacks against Jews in Europe. So there is a video clip there I would like for you to watch on the blood libel, and it explores the power of this lie and how exactly this lie was able to spread throughout Europe, how damaging this lie was for Jews for centuries. So why exactly were Jews persecuted? So why exactly were they a group chosen to be persecuted? Well, some countries actually just expelled Jews altogether. In 1290, Jews were forced to leave England. And we know that it was actually Oliver Cromwell who was the person who allowed Jews to come back to England. The Spanish Inquisition in the 15th century in Spain aimed to remove all anti-Catholic influences. Therefore, if you were Jewish and living in Spain, you had a choice. You could leave or you could convert to Christianity. For those who chose to leave, you would be charged a huge sum if you were on a ship. And then once you had paid, some captains might choose to throw you into the ocean. So for a lot of Jews, Europe was not necessarily a welcoming type of place. And in the 19th century, Jews in Eastern Europe and Russia faced extreme hostilities. This is because Jews were accused of involvement in the assassination of Tsar Alexander II. And as a result, waves of pogroms broke out and Jews were attacked. In 1905, the pogrom led to the death of 2,500 Jews. Okay? And remember, a pogrom is a violent attack. So throughout the medieval and Middle Ages, Jews faced increasing hostilities. So what I would like for you to do for your last task is, first of all, I want you to explain anti-Semitism in your own words. So if I was to ask you, what is anti-Semitism? How would you respond to that question? And if you can try and use a historical example of anti-Semitism as part of your explanation, so for example, Clifford's Tower and the massacre, that would be fantastic. So in your own words, what is anti-Semitism? And give me an example. Secondly, you're going to use pages 104 to 107, so the textbook pages that are on folder, to help you create a mind map. Now, if you want to do a mind map, you can. If you'd rather just do this as regular notes, it's completely up to you. But you need to explain the reasons why Jews faced persecution in the Middle Ages. So we have things like the Crusades, the blood libel, pogrom, Clifford's Tower, etc. Think of and try throughout those textbook pages to pick out all of those different reasons why Jews faced persecution in the Middle Ages, okay? Use the slides as well on, obviously, this PowerPoint and your key terms to help in your explanations. Once you finish those, if you would like to stretch and challenge yourself, you have a hot and a super hot challenge question, okay? So good luck, and if you have any questions, please make sure to email myself or Mr. Marshall.